The sunlight spilled through my apartment window, catching the silk of my blouse and warming my skin just enough to remind me that some things in life were still gentle. I sipped my coffee, savoring the slight bitterness, when my phone buzzed insistently on the marble countertop. The name flashing across the screen made my chest tighten just a little. Ethan. My nephew. I hadn't expected him today. Ethan, who at 16 had perfected the art of entitlement. He walked in like he owned the place, tossing his backpack carelessly onto the floor, and smirked at me as if I were invisible. "Aunt Lauren, can you make me a snack?" he asked, tone dripping with expectation. I felt that old familiar sting, the one that came from years of being treated like I was here just to serve everyone else. But I pushed it down, settling it behind a calm, polite smile. "Of course, Ethan," I said softly, my fingers brushing the edge of my coffee mug. Inside, I was already plotting a quiet little reminder of exactly whose support funded his fancy prep school, the one that gave him every opportunity he now took for granted. The apartment smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fresh linen. I straightened the cushions on the couch and let my eyes trace the skyline through the tall windows. Everything looked perfect on the surface. Everything looked mine. And today, Ethan was about to learn a truth he wasn't expecting. I remember the first time I realized that my family didn't see me as someone who deserved respect. I was 22, freshly graduated, bright-eyed, and full of hope. I had just landed a junior position at a marketing firm downtown, my first real taste of independence. That excitement didn't last long when I returned home one weekend to visit my family. My nephew Ethan, then just a small boy, tugged at his mother's hand while I carried a tray of snacks. "Aunt Lauren, hurry up," he shouted, impatient, his little voice sharp in the kitchen. My mother laughed, brushing it off like it was funny. "He's just a kid, honey."
"Go along with it," she said.
I felt a lump in my throat. My hands shook slightly, balancing the tray as I obeyed. Every small command, every dismissive glance, reminded me of a role I had never signed up for, servant to my family's whims. My father sat in his armchair, barely looking up from the newspaper, completely unaware of my presence beyond what I could do for them. Later that evening, I confided in my grandmother, who had always been my quiet refuge. "Lauren," she said, holding my hand and gazing at me with those steady, knowing eyes, "don't let anyone make you feel invisible. You have your own life to live. Remember, kindness is your gift, but strength is your shield." She pressed a small charm into my palm, a tiny silver key, simple but weighty in meaning.
"Keep this.
When you feel small, hold it and remember who you are." I went to bed that night with the key in my hand, feeling a mixture of sadness and determination. It burned like a promise in my chest. I knew I couldn't stay in the same place forever, serving while the world passed me by. I had to carve my own path, make my own decisions, and claim the respect I deserved. By the end of that year, I had quietly applied to jobs in another city, saved every extra dollar, and started to imagine a life where my worth wasn't measured by my family's convenience. That key wasn't just a charm. It was a reminder that I was capable, that I had the right to step out of the shadows and into a life built on my own terms. Leaving my hometown wasn't easy. I packed my life into 2 suitcases, leaving behind the people who had underestimated me for years, and moved to Chicago. I found a modest apartment with peeling paint and a creaky floorboard, but it was mine. For the first time, I didn't have to apologize for existing. I started at a small marketing agency, the kind that required long nights and endless coffee runs. My mentor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Claire, saw something in me that no one back home had. "You have a voice, Lauren," she said on my second week, eyes scanning my work. "Don't let anyone drown it out." Her words became a lifeline. With Claire's guidance, I learned to pitch ideas confidently, negotiate contracts, and handle clients who underestimated me because of my age or gender. There were moments of doubt, of course. Sleepless nights staring at spreadsheets, heart pounding as I dialed a potential client, wondering if I was good enough. There were days when the failures seemed heavier than the successes. But slowly, meticulously, I built something solid. My first big win was a mid-sized campaign for a boutique brand. It wasn't much in revenue, but it was proof that I could make an impact. The first paycheck I deposited felt like validation, not just of my skill, but of my independence. I kept my family in the dark about most of my progress. Occasional phone calls, vague updates. "I'm doing fine," I'd say, avoiding details that might spark envy or judgment. I didn't need their validation. I was building for myself. Over the next few years, I expanded my clientele, each project more lucrative than the last. I invested wisely, bought my own condo in a quiet part of the city, decorated it with artwork I loved, and surrounded myself with reminders of the woman I was becoming. That little silver key from my grandmother sat on my desk, a quiet talisman of the promise I'd made to myself. It wasn't just the money that mattered, it was the control. The ability to decide, to create, to say yes or no on my own terms. I'd learned to transform hurt into focus, neglect into determination, and doubt into fuel. I imagined one day returning home, not as the girl fetching snacks, but as the woman whose achievements spoke louder than any reprimand or insult ever could. And yet, even as I thrived, I remained discreet. No social media flaunting, no boasting to family. I wanted the revelation to be hers, the one I had carefully nurtured over years of quiet work. Ethan would see the truth soon enough. The doorbell rang, echoing through my condo with a crisp, insistent chime. I hadn't expected anyone today, but I knew exactly who it would be. Ethan. My nephew. I opened the door to see his familiar smug expression, like he had stepped into a kingdom where he already thought he ruled. Behind him, my sister gave a polite, slightly awkward smile, probably expecting the same meek, accommodating version of me she had known for years. "Hi, Aunt Lauren," Ethan said, tossing his backpack onto the sofa as if it were his personal throne. "What's for lunch?" His tone carried the casual expectation of someone who assumes everything revolves around them. I gestured for him to sit, a calm smile on my face, and invited them in. "Come on in," I said, my voice smooth and deliberate. "Let me show you around a little." They followed me through the condo, their eyes widening as they took in the details. The walls were lined with contemporary artwork I had collected over the years, each piece telling a story of a place I'd been, a deal I'd won, a boundary I'd claimed. The living room gleamed with mid-century furniture, tasteful yet unmistakably expensive. On the shelf, neatly displayed, were awards and certificates that marked the growth of my business, achievements they had never been privy to. Ethan's smirk faltered, then vanished entirely. He paused mid-step, staring at the framed certificate of my company's ownership on the wall, then back at the sleek, minimalistic kitchen that seemed worlds away from the cramped space he had expected. I led them to the dining table and poured coffee into delicate porcelain cups. The aroma filled the room, an ordinary comfort masking the extraordinary truth they were about to hear. I sat, leaning back in my chair, and let them absorb the surroundings, letting the silence stretch just long enough for curiosity and doubt to settle in. Finally, I spoke. "Ethan, remember that fancy school you attend?" My voice was calm, almost conversational, but it carried an unshakable weight. "The tuition, the trips, the extracurriculars? All of it comes from the company I built, with the work I've done for years, largely without anyone noticing or believing I could. That includes your education." Ethan froze, his backpack slipping from his hand. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, as though he were trying to form words that wouldn't come. My sister's face went pale, a flush of shame creeping across her cheeks. "Lauren, we had no idea," she whispered, almost in disbelief. I let the moment linger. Let them feel the shift. No anger, no shouting, just the undeniable presence of a woman who had been underestimated, ignored, and dismissed, now standing fully realized in her power. "And yes," I continued, smiling faintly at Ethan, "I'm still proud of you, but it's time you understand the value of respect. And maybe, just maybe, learn a little humility along the way." Ethan looked down at his hands, silence hanging heavy between us. The smirk, the entitlement, the assumed superiority, It had all vanished. In its place was awe, tinged with guilt, and a dawning comprehension of what it meant to underestimate someone quietly building an empire behind the scenes. I watched Ethan fidget in the chair, the bravado that had once defined him now dissolved into something fragile and uncertain. I could have let him stew in embarrassment, could have walked away and left him with the taste of his own entitlement. But I wasn't cruel. I was strategic. I wanted this moment to teach, to reshape, and to establish boundaries that would stick. Ethan, I began, voice calm but unwavering. I'm not going to stop paying for your school. But this comes with conditions. I leaned forward slightly, letting my gaze settle on him. You will treat the people around you with respect, from your teachers to your friends. No more barking orders or acting as if the world owes you favors. He swallowed, his eyes wide, but I pressed on. You will also take responsibility for your studies. Work hard, genuinely engage with what you're learning, and show that you appreciate the opportunities you've been given. I will help you, but only if you are willing to meet me halfway. My sister nodded silently, still absorbing the truth about me, but I addressed her too. And you, I said gently, need to let go of old habits, expecting Lauren or anyone else to prioritize your convenience over her life. Encourage Ethan, yes. Support him, of course. But stop diminishing others to elevate yourselves. That stops now. The apartment was quiet, save for the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. I poured another cup of coffee, offering it to Ethan. Change won't happen overnight, I continued. But respect, effort, and accountability are things you can start practicing today. I could see the impact in his posture, the subtle shift in his demeanor. There was no magic in my words alone. It was the combination of truth, authority, and consistency. He understood, at least on some level, that his previous behavior had limits now, limits enforced by a woman who had quietly built a life of autonomy and influence, entirely on her own terms. Finally, I leaned back and smiled, letting the tension ease just a little. You can rise to this, I said softly, or you can struggle under the weight of entitlement. The choice is yours, Ethan. And your journey starts today.
It was a subtle power shift.
I hadn't humiliated anyone. I hadn't shouted. I had set conditions, established boundaries, and handed the tools for growth back to them. Compassion and firmness, side by side. This was how leadership worked, not through fear, but through clear expectation, accountability, and the reminder that respect is earned, not assumed. And in that moment, I felt the full measure of my transformation. The girl who once trembled under dismissal had become the woman who quietly, decisively, reshaped her world, and those who had underestimated her along the way. Weeks passed after that day, and I noticed subtle changes. Ethan no longer demanded things as if the world revolved around him. He studied more attentively, asked questions in class, and even helped with small chores without being prompted. My sister began calling me, not for help with errands, but to seek advice on her own work and decisions. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be overnight, but the seeds of respect had been planted. I sat one evening by my window, the city lights sparkling like tiny reminders of how far I had come. The silver key my grandmother had given me glimmered softly on my desk, catching the glow of the lamp. I traced it with my fingers and smiled, remembering her words, "Kindness is your gift, strength is your shield." It had been my compass through years of quiet struggle, guiding me toward independence and clarity. I realized then that my journey wasn't just about wealth or recognition. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my voice, and my ability to shape my own life. Watching Ethan grow, seeing my family adjust their patterns, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't imagined possible. I had endured the pain of being dismissed, but it had forged me into someone capable of creating change, not only in my own life, but in the lives of those I loved. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and walked over to the balcony. The cool air brushed my face, carrying the distant hum of the city below. I breathed deeply, savoring the quiet triumph and the knowledge that respect, once earned, could never be taken away. I looked at Ethan's school report, now sitting on the counter, and felt a quiet pride. Not because of the money I had provided, but because he was beginning to understand the value of effort and humility. And as I traced the edge of the silver key one last time, I whispered to myself, a soft but firm declaration of who I had become. I am Lauren. I am my own power. I am enough. The girl who once served quietly was gone. In her place stood a woman who had claimed her life, her worth. Bottom of form,